So,
Okay, then shall we start already? But okay, we have two people. Yeah, the reason, as I already explained, is probably that conference is digital, and then if you have on-site conference, that's much different. But anyways, thank you very much. Maybe hopefully there are some more people joining. And in any ways, it's an interesting conference, especially if it's really taking place in presence. So also check the program for next year. I don't know where's next year actually. I think it's in Portugal next year. So that's always a good place to meet and exchange with other colleagues. Meet a lot of colleagues that you maybe did not expect to see. And now this year due to Corona, hopefully one of the last digital conferences. Let's be optimistic. Thank you very much to the audience and to the panelists. Now we have this round table here on the European republicanism, or the European republicanism as an utopia of the, as a utopia of the past, or the title of the conference like this, I wanted to say it's Europe's past, present, and future, utopias and dystopias. And today we are reflecting on the idea of a European republic, European republicanism. What is there from the European heritage of the political philosophy of republicanism, and how can and is that already applied to European integration theory, but also in practice. Also political movements have always been influenced by Republican thought and thinking. And so today we want to draw a long line from history to today's new approach in economic or in European integration theories, and to also political movements building on these theories, and to see how political movements get inspired, but also need maybe insights from academic analysis. And presentation of the panelists, I think I can do that very short, as most of you know each other. We first have Martin van Gelderen here, who is a professor at the Göttingen University and director of the Lichtenberg Colleague, and has published many works on republicanism, and especially also of the understanding of freedom in republican theory, together with Quentin Skinner, Freedom and the Construction of Europe, and also as an editor, Republicanism, Shared European Heritage, so an expert on Republican history and philosophy. Then Stefan Collignon, who is professor at the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna and visiting professor at LSE. Also has been visiting a scholar at Harvard and other institutions. Director of the Association for the Monetary Union of Europe in Paris, and has published on the idea of a European republic, especially on the governance of European public goods, and also the European Republic, reflections on the political economy of a future constitution. We were supposed to have also Ulrike Gero here on board and on the panel, who today has some problems, and hopefully she will join a little bit later. I very briefly present her maybe already, so we don't have to do that later. Ulrike is professor at the University of Krems at the Department of European Policy and Study, and will take a position as a professor at the University of Bonn this autumn, at the Center Ernst Robert Curtius, on the European cultures from a French-German perspective. And she's also founder of the European Democracy Lab in Berlin, and has published also on the idea of a European Republic, especially why Europe needs to become a republic, a political utopy. And she also published a manifesto for the European Republic that was signed by many other scholars and thinkers. And we have Ulrike Liebert, who has been full professor at the University of Bremen and head of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence for European Studies there. as a PhD from the University of Florence, the same as Martin also, and has also published a lot on the democratization of the European Union. Has been visiting a scholar at the Autonoma de Barcelona in Spain, Heidelberg, Cornell University, and published, for example, the democratizing the EU from below: citizenship, civil society, and the public sphere, and the new politics of European civil society, and has also been a candidate for the election of the European Parliament in 2019 for the German Green Party. Can maybe give some insights from this perspective. And me myself, I'm Thilo Zimmermann. I studied at the University of Cologne economics, and I was working at the German embassy in Rome at the economic department during the Euro and financial crisis. Then I did my PhD in Pisa with Stefan, the Schola Superior St. Anna, and have been in for research periods also in the USA and in Paris. And now I'm working at the University of Cologne. Okay, so that was maybe also more for the students of Stefan, the presentation, so that they know who you are, because most of you, as already said, know each other. So thank you again very much for having agreed to, or being part of this panel. And I think, we would start with some intervention of the panelists, and then we can open up for discussion as well. A small group anyway, I think that will be quite easy to manage. Then you can just ask your question, raise your hand. Of course, you can also put your questions in the chat, but I think there's such a small group that will not be necessary. But then I would open up the stage for Martin for his contribution. And Martin has prepared some thesis about Republican freedom and European citizenship, which I share here.
No, better the other one, because this is small to read.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, shall I just start from here?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, the way we set it up was that I would start with some historical reflections on, in particular, the links between historical notions of Republican freedom and historical notions of citizenship. As the subtitle indicates, I focus on the Renaissance legacy from Coluccio Salutati to Hugo Grotius. That is a slightly unusual take on the history of European republicanism, which I will explain in a few minutes. For the rest, I think I'm fairly safe in saying that what I present is a summary of the state of the art when we're talking about the links between notions of Republican freedom and notions of citizenship. To juxtapose, in the Anglophone liberal tradition, as a person, I am free, to quote from Isaiah Berlin's famous essay, The Two Concepts of Liberty, to the degree to which no man or body of man interferes with my activity. So according to this conception, as the quote indicates, of what is negative liberty, freedom means to be free from coercion, free from intervention, with the choices one has decided to make and the actions one has decided to take. It doesn't matter in this conception, au fond, what kind of political system you're living under. The historical example that's always being quoted here is that of the debate between Thomas Hobbes and James Harrington, where Thomas Hobbes said, if I have the same freedom from coercion in Constantinople as under the Sultan, living under the Sultan of Constantinople, as I have as a citizen of Lucca, then my freedom is the same in both political systems. The critique on that point, on that conception of freedom, has come about two ways, from two directions. One is from contemporary political philosophy. Philip Pettit is the big name there. Historically, it is much more Quentin Skinner who has done some of the main work. In Quentin's perception, the idea of the human person as being sui juris, a term from Roman law, is seen as the foundation of the conception of freedom as non-domination. So the difference between living as a citizen of the Republic of Lucca and as a subject of the Sultan of Constantinople is that whilst I may be free to move in the same directions in both places, as a citizen of Lucca, I'm doing that because I'm a self-governing citizen, governing my own republic, whereas as a subject in Constantinople, I do so at the will of the Sultan, who can revoke and change his will whenever he wants. Lucca belongs to the heart and core of the Republican tradition in this perspective, that is usually seen as moving from the Italian Renaissance, with Machiavelli as its most candid spokesman, but actually with Lucca as one of the long-standing examples, to the Dutch, the English, the Polish, and the other European republicans of the 17th century, up to the American and French revolutionaries of the 18th century. So, whilst liberals see freedom principally in terms of non-interference, Republicans argue for this concept of freedom that puts non-domination up front. The key argument, both concerning the freedom of the citizen and the freedom of the republic, is that the republic and its citizens are only free and truly free when and if they do not depend on the will of any other power, however benevolent that power the Sultan may be, for their decisions to act freely. So there is an intricate connection here between the free citizen and the free republic. To put it simple, straightforwardly, you can only be free as a citizen if your republic is free. My fourth point is that to argue that the core part of human freedom is to be independent from the will of another, to be free from domination, may need at least some notion of what the will is all about, both as a human faculty and as a source of our moral agency. Republican freedom as non-domination presupposes the freedom of the human will. And that is where my own research comes in. What I'm looking for is in particular authors and debates where this link between the freedom of the human will and the self-government of the citizen is put up front. I start my own work with Coluccio Salutati, the Chancellor of Florence, the first one in a long row of thinkers and chancellors who combined both moral philosophy and political action. Leonardo Bruni, his successor and pupil, is one of the most famous, and of course Machiavelli was the second Chancellor of Florence. Salutati presents the will in the Trecento as the mistress of the choosable, freely able to move itself and to command to action or not. In that humanist vision of the Trecento, the human will governs moral life. And that you can see as one of the great breakthroughs towards the Renaissance, in the sense that if the human will governs moral life and not just divine powers, God himself or other divine creatures, then there is something to create on this earth. We're not only talking about the afterlife anymore. In a treatise that defended the superiority of law over medicine, both seen as practical disciplines, Salutati in this perspective, with this vision, heralded the human will as the first principle of the vita activa, and as such of civil life. You can, in fact, argue that this is where the notion of civil life, in, if you want, a modern meaning, really begins. The idea is then taken up by a tradition of humanists. In my own work, I follow Marsilius Ficino in Florence and his circle of Neoplatonists, which included painters like Botticelli, which are also said to include, which is often also claimed to include some of the Medici, Lorenzo il Magnifico himself. Then I moved to the Low Countries, to Erasmus von Rotterdam, and one of his disciples, Hugo Grotius, as a key representative of the Renaissance in the Low Countries. So what I'm looking at as a historian is what we used to call the urban belt of Europe. Grotius in particular summarizes some of the key points in this key line. God made man aut Gusius, liber sui que juris, a line which we perhaps best translate as, God made man fully self-moving, free and on one's own right. There is a rich notion of the freedom of the human being here, master of one's own action, free from domination, indeed of the human being as being one's own dominus, his own master. So freedom in this conception means self-government, built on a strong and rather controversial notion of the freedom of will, because where is divine providence in this notion? Where are the cosmological forces, the laws of nature? But in that controversial notion of freedom will, we talk about first of self-movement, secondly of the freedom to choose to act and not to act, and then indeed to govern yourself. Within that tradition, human freedom means self-government, i.e. the juxtaposition of the self-governing citizen is not so much that of the slave against the free person, as it is in Roman law, for example, but that of the unfree slave vis-a-vis the civis, the self-governing citizen. The emphasis here is on that notion of self-governing citizenship. I give a Dutch example. The Republic in this perspective, and that we should remind ourselves of when we move ahead to our own future, to shaping our own future. The Republic is a civic creation. It is created by free self-governing persons who decide at their own free will to set up a republic and turn themselves into a citizen. So if freedom is a pillar of the European Union, the principal task for the Union is to build a system of governance that has the self-governing citizen as its foundation. Historically, citizens governed their civitas, their city, their commonwealth, and republicans have always struggled to translate civic government to larger geographical units. They have done so mainly by devising federalism, by setting up federalist government, by devising constitutions, by arguing about rights, and by codifying rights, rights in particular also of that guarantee the political participation within the republic they want to govern themselves. And I think with that, I move over to Stefan.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. I think it's a highly stimulating and totally appropriate way to start our discussion. The distinction between liberal and republican notions of liberty, of course, raise a number of questions. First of all, when we talk about self-government, who is the self? The liberal aspect is very much non-interference into myself, my own space. So the self is the individual. It is often, not always, but often understood that the republican sense of self is a community or civitas, or in any case, a form of community where everyone agrees on some essential points. Maybe it's an overlapping consensus in the sense of roles, maybe it is an agreement about constitutional principles. But I think what is absolutely crucial is, as Martin says, the focus on rights. Now, my own research is focusing very much on the creation of modern rights as individual rights that come from contractual relations. Therefore, it is I and you can create a contract for where we are free to say yes and no to the terms, and this very freedom makes us equal. So that the fundamental political norm behind this kind of contractual freedom is freedom and equality. Now, that is also what has often been the driving force in republicanism, starting, of course, with the French Revolution, where it was formalized. Nowadays, we write on all our schools and universities and public buildings, liberté, égalité, fraternité, but the fraternité only came 100 years after the French Republic during the Commune de Paris, and is really a way of going back. What is implicit in that, and Martin mentioned the issue of Berlin, is what is this community? What is the freedom of those who decide as a collective? And I think as an economist, we have a fairly clear distinction between that. We have private goods, which are excludable and competitive, and these private goods are effectively allocated by markets where we can exclude others by raising the price and insisting that in a contractual relationship, one has to pay for the goods that we appropriate individually, and then there's no interference if we have property rights that protect us against these interferences. However, this idea of liberalism only really works for private goods. But the whole issue that we have to confront when we talk about a community, civitas, commonwealth, republic, is the governance of public goods, where we have externalities. And these externalities require rules and regulations, which require then some form of government, governance, rules that apply to all. And the question then is, who is deciding those rules? Now, in the Ottoman Sultan society, it's the Sultan who sets the rules, or more generally, it's a dictator, it's a ruler, it's the prince, whatsoever. But the idea of law and rights is that these are granted out of the benevolence of the prince, let's say. The alternative model, of course, is a contractual one. Now, my own argument and studies show that it is very much the development of the monetary economy with transactions based on contract that also develop the normativity, which then is put into and integrated into the collective decision-making, so that effectively the contractual principle is translated into the social contract. But the social contract then requires, as the private contract, that individuals are free and equal. So in that sense, positive law that is imposed by the sovereign is really a kind of pre-republican, pre-modern way of granting rights as benevolent acts. The modern and the republican way then is that rights are negotiated, come out of the contractual relationship, and that would imply for the civitas that we are also setting up contracts with each other as to how to govern ourselves and how the rules for the collective are having relevance or are normatively binding for everyone who is a member of this. But of course, the question is, what is the member? Who is the member? Who should be part of this community? And that's where this whole issue brings us to the European Republic, in the sense that I think we can all agree that since the creation of the European Union, there's an increasing number of European public goods that has been created. By European public goods, I mean public goods that have externalities that affect all citizens in the European Union. These externalities are typically in the economic field. We have had single market, we have had common agricultural policy, competition policy, of course, monetary policy and fiscal policy increasingly, but also immigration, foreign policy increasingly reveals itself as an externality for everyone who lives in the European Republic. And so the question then is, a European Republic means what? It means the domain in which public goods are affecting all European citizens through their externalities. And for that, one would need to have a form of government or governance that is democratically legitimized by the citizens who are the owners of these public goods. Now, this is not an utopia, this is reality, a reality in which we live and have been living for several decades now. And these European public goods are increasing in their numbers, in their extension, in the reach of their externalities. And so the issue of this, how to govern these public goods, becomes increasingly more important and prevalent. If you take economic theory on public goods, what is interesting is that other than the private goods that are allocated by markets, we really have pure public goods. They are non-excludable and non-rival, but they are rather rare. They are more related to issues like public defense and so on. The much more relevant issues are public goods, where either you can exclude someone, but the production is non-rivalrous, meaning everyone needs to contribute. Now, these are public goods, I call them inclusive public goods, where people who want to join, they have an incentive to cooperate because the benefits from the externalities are worth the contribution that needs to be paid, the price to be paid, so to say, in order to benefit from them. The other class are common resource goods. Common resource goods are public goods which are limited in size so that there is competition of who gets how much. But at the same time, it's impossible to exclude people. Now, these exclusive public goods are extremely difficult to manage or administrate, because you cannot really exclude the free riders, or you need very complicated mechanisms for that. And that means also that decision-making in this area is rather complex. I would argue that the European Union, with its public goods, started out initially with inclusive public goods, which is partly why there's always been an appetite for joining the European Union in order to benefit from these public goods. Like a tennis club, you want to have the benefit of playing on the tennis grounds, and therefore you pay the contribution for that. With the creation of the euro, we have imposed a hard budget constraint, which of course was necessary in order to make the single market function correctly. But with the hard budget constraint of the monetary economy, we have transformed many, not all, but many public goods and added new public goods that are effectively exclusive. This is particularly relevant in the area of fiscal policy and public debt, because it means that if one country increases its public debt, it pulls in capital from a total amount of money created by the central bank that would have negative effects on others. So with exclusive public goods, it's either me or you. And the dynamic in decision-making is with veto players who would like to block another one in order to have their own benefit. My conclusion from this analysis is that for exclusive public goods, you need a single authority. You need a European government. For inclusive public goods, you can have voluntary cooperation, very similar along the ways of intergovernmentalism that we have seen in the past. But it will not work in the long run for exclusive public goods. But if we say these exclusive public goods need to be managed by a centralized authority, then we are back to the issues that Martin mentioned before, which is the citizen, the cives, who are the owners of these public goods, but who also need to have their right to decide how these public goods are managed. And I think that is the fundamental challenge that the European Union is confronting today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan. That was a very good insight into how Republican theory and Republican virtues and thinking can be combined indeed with economic theory, and we'll say a little bit more on that also later. And then also shows how that republicanism can offer important tools to analyze the European, the institutions of the European Union, and to answer important questions on how to allocate prerogatives on the different levels of the European Union, and why it is so important to think about that and have new approaches. But yeah, Stefan made now the point that if you have these externalities and if you have a certain kind of public goods, then it's necessary to have also the governance of these public goods. And but the governance, as we learned also from Martin, if we want to organize that in a free in a way that allows the individual still to claim that he is free and to be free, it's important to have a say also in these governance. And I think this is something that Ulrike Liebert also worked a lot about. So Ulrike Rohr is still not here. She was also supposed to talk on that. But then I would pass on to Ulrike Liebert, who worked on how to organize democracy from the bottom, how to organize the European Union from the bottom. And maybe we can, I pass the word to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also for having me in this really intriguing conversation, how trying to match, to fit, to exchange between Republican theory and history of ideas and actual political practices. Let me start with this catch-22, which Stefan has ended with. How to get citizens who are keen on not being dominated into willing or buying into a centralized authority for the sake of an exclusive public resource good or public resource goods. And I will come to this later, or maybe we can continue this conversation when I have made my points. Let me start with last Saturday, June 19th, the Conference on the Future of Europe convened its first plenary meeting. In this unprecedented exercise, it brought together representatives from European politics and society, including national and European parliamentarians, civil society, ordinary citizens, among them especially many young people. Each speaker asserted the social and political priorities for the future of Europe she believed should be up for deliberation during the next 10 months, and EU reform. To me, listening to these manifold voices turned the 5 hours long session Saturday morning into an exciting event to watch. Takeaways include ideas of what will count 10 months on as success or failure. Will this transnational democratic experiment provide the seeds for necessary European treaty change? Will it empower the few who support treaty reforms only for renationalizing EU powers? Or will it help the many, calling neither for more Europe nor for less, but for a better EU? Referring to the topic of our panel, will the Conference on the Future of Europe provide an opportunity to build stepping stones towards a Federal Republic of Europe? By calling in his speech in the plenary to deliberate for the Conference on the Future of Europe, to deliberate on reforms leading towards a Federal Republic of Europe, a German member of the European Greens, Daniel Freund, refers to more than a personal vision for the future of Europe, such as Joschka Fischer 20 years ago. By advocating the stepwise development of building blocks towards the Federal Republic of Europe, he also abstains from the finality of European integration language. He doesn't talk about a blueprint, a European constitutional treaty. Treaty reforms, yes, but not a European constitution. And neither an avant-garde for reaching the final state of the EU. I want to make a stepwise argument to unfold this package or this reference to the mission turned into, or which emerged in this plenary debate. First, I submit that the Green agenda to contribute towards a Federal Republic has taken in lessons learned from past failures, namely those of the Constitutional Convention and the treaty establishing a constitution for Europe, in two respects. It's distinct from the traditional confederal and federal conceptions of the EU by putting citizens centerpiece, and by developing European representative democracy to embrace participatory deliberative practices. And second, it replaces former top-down Big Bang strategies to bring about a constitutional change, political union, by a pragmatic, incremental bottom-up approach. Yet, this is my my conclusion. To make this mission a successful one, to me, some crucial elements appear still to be missing. Now, what is distinctive about the Green Federal Republican agenda? In the Greens Manifesto of Principles, the so-called the Grundsatzprogramm as of 2020, the term Federal Republic of Europe appears several times and referring to principles and understandings that patently diverge from the traditional notions of the EU as a confederation of nation states, as well as from the varieties of European federalisms, from Spinelli, Schuman, and Delors to present European federalist advocates. First, in what respects? In the Green Federal Republican conception, equal rights for all citizens are guaranteed in a binding manner through the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, regardless of which country of the Republic a person lives in. This is quote. Next quote, the realization of these rights is bound to the principles of subsidiarity, according to which tasks and responsibilities are dealt with at the lowest level at which goals can be achieved, local, state, federal, EU. In this way, the sovereignty of the citizens is strengthened. Second, the Green conception maps out a constitutive design that balances federal with republican principles, a two-chamber European Parliament with symmetrical powers, different from the German model, where one is elected by universal European suffrage, yes, and the second represents the states and regions, the regions like Catalonia or Scotland, putting large and small territory entities at an equal footing. So in this respect, resembling the Swiss model. Third, the Federal Republic of Europe establishes a framework in which the common good, rather than powerful individual interests or governments, prevail. So this is not furthermore developed, and I think there would be way and a space for improving this and deepening this reference more. Now, the second question, which prospects has the Greens' incremental approach towards a Federal Republic of Europe for the upcoming years? Embracing such a pragmatic approach towards that goal, the present Green European political agenda does not contradict standing for a set of long-term guiding principles to inform party political European strategies and actions. So the European Greens have been emerging as an agency for a Federal Republic of Europe, in my view, starting with the power struggles between the European Council and the European Parliament after the last elections, the 2019 elections. These conflicts exacerbated when the heads of state and government flagrantly dismissed the parliamentary party's lead candidates and instead nominated Ursula von der Leyen for Commission presidency. And in this principled struggle, the Greens have been had the role of a linchpin who threatened to oppose von der Leyen's nomination, confirmation vote in the parliament. At the end, it was a very close vote, only because the Greens abstained finally. And they abstained because von der Leyen brought forward quite surprisingly the European Green Deal, the project of a conference on the future of Europe, and until the next elections to mend the lead candidate and electoral deficits, transnational candidate requests and claims the European Parliament was so keen on. So that we see this conference now in place has to do with this weakness of her nomination procedure, and the Greens have played the role as a winner of the last elections, doubling their seats, which was not very visible, but in my view important. Ever since a bare majority of MEPs had approved the new Commission leadership, the Greens have creatively piloted and joined the necessary forces, bringing together coalitions within the European Parliament to make the Conference on the Future of Europe happen. Now, in close cooperation with the German Greens, who in their current federal election program for the September elections, have laid down in the next 2 years, the Conference on the Future of Europe offers a great opportunity to develop in community with the citizens the reforms of the EU. We want to use this for the next phase of European integration on the way towards a federal European Republic and for formulating European responses to the big challenges. And these big challenges in the green perspective, of course, first of all, is climate neutrality to reach the Paris Accord climate goals. And this is a question which needs also further discussion, how it relates to and how it will, whether it will really play a prominent role in connection to the Federal Republic of Europe. Now, if the Greens have effectively co-piloted the Conference on the Future of Europe as a leverage, as a way towards overcoming the impasse in which the European Union has found itself for quite some time, can this work out also in the case of the Federal Republic? To turn this vision into a mission, yes, it has turned into a mission, but into a successful one, we still need a publicly convincing narrative, or maybe several narratives about European federal republicanism, narratives capable of winning over. I'm mentioning 3 target groups, let's say, static citizens who oppose who in opposition to mobile European citizens do not perceive to gain anything from a European Republic built on equal citizenship rights, namely social rights and social redistribution. Second, small states who, in contrast to bigger member states, fear to overproportionately lose power and influence. Here, the Swiss example could be important, how in the 19th century, actually a deal was struck giving the small states exactly the same powers in the territorial chamber. Yeah. And third, the climate protection community, convincing young people, Fridays for Future, Parents for Future, Scientists for Future, that the climate neutrality is a common European good, an exclusive one that cannot be governed unless a Federal Republic of Europe is put in place. I submit that Republican theoretical discussions could and should make important contributions, make an important difference towards that aim of developing the public narrative further. The current historical moment seems very favorable to me for engaging the European society at large in this endeavor of public conversations about the future of a better European Union, rebuilt on Republican federal principles. And I am happy to be here and to start or engage in this dialogue.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for this very good overview about what happened inside the Green Party and how the Green Party adopted this idea of a European Republic, which shows how important it is to have also the interaction between academia and political actors, which but then also shows, of course, how important it is to have clear ideas what republicanism means, what republicanism is, and how institutional designs can really then guarantee the freedom of the individual and how the political system is to look like. And of course, also how difficult it is to then, first now you can think about this theoretically, but to set this in practice and to achieve that, good arguments are needed. And so this is why it's then important to have this link. And so then I wanted to conclude a little bit, because I had now the contributions by the panelists, and then to get later on further in the discussion then to exchange, because as Ulrike said, we're bringing different fields together and trying to get this into a synthesis. And what we asked today, what is freedom, and what is also the European understanding of freedom. So today we draw a long line from the European heritage of Republican theory since the Renaissance to its role for the European Union today. And to what respect can republicanism be an alternative approach to existing approaches? Also, this is something we did not touch so much yet today. So I would like also to integrate European republicanism within existing theories and also show there why it is a different approach to understand European integration different. Which advantage does it bring? Can republicanism bring in new perspectives to better understanding for the problems that Europe is facing? And where are its limitations? So I also prepared 4 points which I think are important in this regard. The first one is the potential of European republicanism to combine political science and economic theory. As Stefan presented before, the Res Publica of public goods shows how republicanism can be linked with economic rationale. And this is important because this gap between political science and economics, or also between economic integration and political integration, has been one of the major driving forces of the Euro crisis. And so it's important to have approaches that are able to bridge between economics and political science, political philosophy. And the Res Publica of public goods offers a different framework than, for example, liberal intergovernmentalism, which maybe to now has been the most advanced combination of political science and political economy. Revchik said it's political economy, it's not economics where he built his framework on. And but he modeled the intergovernmental bargaining of member states and the outcome of this bargaining. And the Republic of Public Goods allows for a different viewpoint. And this is what it also makes so interesting for European integration, maybe, as it does not avoid also the questions of sovereignty and where sovereignty has to be located. That was, Stefan, the argument made before, that for some public good problems or externalities, you need a central authority. And this is not to bargain about. And it allows, therefore, to analyze the institutional framework of the European Union, building on the existing theories also which already are there on fiscal federalism and so on. And the Republic of Public Goods, it's therefore about self-governance of fiscal federalism, if you want to say like this. And this is what Martin already said, that freedom, the Republican sense, is about governing yourself and have a say in governance. And furthermore, it can also be applied to further fields, monetary integration, political philosophy, law, but even arts. And it's therefore allows also to broaden the field of analysis and to build bridges to other disciplines. This is the strength, but of course the strength can always be the weaken point. It's always a question if you have to keep, if you are integrating different theories, are you losing the focus of the subgroups? But in general, of course, the interdisciplinary approach allows then to win new viewpoints and for problems of European integration. Another important field or innovation, maybe that, or another different viewpoint, let's say like this, is also the question of what is actually the driving force of European integration, which also has been discussed and contested in the past. So bridging the gap between economic and political science theories means also a re-articulation of the question, what drives European integration. And intergovernmentalism argued, especially Stanley Hoffman, that European integration would stop, for example, or would proceed at low politics, like economic integration, and would stop at high politics, such as national security and geopolitics. Also, neoliberal intergovernmentalism is building on this viewpoint. However, the international setting, how it's developed in the last year with the United States more and more reluctant to provide the free lunch of security. Also, geopolitical considerations again become more important, and also here the republicanism can have a different viewpoint and can bring new insights. As maybe a major driving force of European integration can also be seen the fear of domination, and also the domination from outside. A third point, what I want to make is the how republicanism, what we heard today, what republicanism can say about the institutional design of Europe. So what is Europe and how should it look like? There exist different approaches to the understanding of this question. Again, you have a liberal and intergovernmental approach that builds on economic incentives, economic integration. So economic integration takes place if there's an economic advantage for the member states, but it still builds very strong on the role of the member states. And on the other hand, you had, of course, historically also concepts like the one of Spinelli, who proposed the immediate creation of a federation in order to realize an utopia of a socialist Europe, also to achieve political aims. This had not come true, had been rejected at that time, or did not go through that political process that maybe Ulrike described, which for the idea of the European Republic. Because this has been a too big step forward at once. And has been radical, too radical, unrealistic, and too manageable. Neo-functionalism has been some kind of compromise after World War II, but not really an alternative. But republicanism offers here a different approach, as liberalism claims that the democratic will is actually the aggregation of pre-political individual interests, but republicanism indeed emphasizes that the claims that the democratic will is formed in a public debate, and that preferences can be changed by those debates. Having a say in this public debate is what Martin again defined as a freedom as non-domination. The result of such a public debate can be a neoliberal Europe, but also a social Europe or a mixture of both. So European republicanism can therefore deliver a synthesis, as it doesn't have a preference by itself, but emphasizes the role of the public debate also to set the rules and the institutional design, therefore. And republicanism means, of course, also active citizenship and self-governance. And how this is important to realize democratic institutional design of the European Union, what Ulrike also explained before. But because we are here also to discuss about this link and about the border between an academic debate and also the political movements and how both are influencing each other. Of course, you also have to ask yourself, does republicanism has or follow a political agenda? For sure, republicanism takes a position. Citizens should be active in politics or should have a say. But does it have a political agenda in itself? That's difficult to say, as I already argued before. It's more the public debate is important. But there are, of course, movements that have been based on these Republican arguments. There's the Zapatero government, 2004 in Spain, that has been influenced by a Republican agenda, and Martí and Petit wrote a book also about that, A Political Philosophy of Public Life, the Civic Republicanism, Zapatero, Spain, where you can see how republicanism influenced a political agenda. Of course, also 2008, some years later, you had the Yes, You Can movement in the US, where the election campaign of Obama aimed to regain access to institutions. This was a very important aspect. And today, maybe now that's in its beginning, you have the in 2020, the German Green Party who integrated the idea of a federal republic of Europe into its manifesto of principles. And again, maybe to distinguish the manifesto of principles is the program for the next 10 to 20 years. So it's very general, but a long-term strategy. It's not the election manifesto for the election campaign for the general election in September. There it's written, but at least in one sentence also, that the European Federal Republic of Europe is the fixed star of the Green Party. But also this builds on these Republican arguments. But it's not only limited to the left, of course, also the right is building on Republican arguments. In France, the right wing is always building its argumentation on the Republic. But also in Germany, for example, one should not forget that also the complaints that have been put forward against the Maastricht Treaty at the German Constitutional Court were in its argumentation built on republicanism. However, on a communitarian understanding of republicanism, that republicanism can only be achieved within a community or within a folk. And the German Constitutional Court did not follow that. But in the end, it was a stone that was a brick in the integration process that they were able to bring in here, because the Constitutional Court set boundaries for the process of European integration that influenced the further process of integration. And also then in the end, of course, the trust of the markets if this project of economic integration will really be completed. But to understand also this different understanding of republicanism, for example, which different understandings of republicanism are there and how do they influence the idea how Europe should look like or should not look like. It's important to understand, for example, the different Republican approaches in political philosophy. and to this is important also for political actors, for example. That's what would be a role also of the academic for the academics. But it's also important, of course, to distinguish between a political program, political movements, and academic analysis. Yeah, to have a close exchange between those fields, but see also where are the different scopes of those, of course. Yeah, nevertheless, politicians and courts, they use republicanism to make political arguments, and therefore it is important to have an academic, clear idea of what republicanism is and where and how it can be applied. Yeah, just maybe now very shortly, where can it be applied in different fields, although Ulrike already mentioned also some, the economic crisis, of course, as I argued already before, can be also understood the Euro crisis now. Okay, it's some years ago now, but as a gap between economic and political integration. And so there was created a European construction where the economic forces were arguably so hard that there was no alternative, as Angela Merkel said at that time. And of course, this is also interesting from a Republican point of view. If there's no alternative, is there still freedom? And how can that be to end up in a republic, democratic state in a situation where there's no alternative? Yeah, one should also not forget that the right-wing party, maybe people from outside Germany are not so aware of it, are called Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative für Germany, building on this quote of Angela Merkel from the right-wing economists at that time. Another field is, of course, also Europe as a global player. What can Europe offer to the world with its history and its heritage? We have the United States and the Pax Americana that's getting under pressure more and more. Is there an alternative that Europe can offer? Yeah, but you also have, of course, China and a very, very different understanding of what a people republic is, and the Silk Road, and to ease conflicts maybe with economic incentives, but representing a vision of not which is not based on freedom, and for sure not on freedom as non-dominance. And here it's also interesting, for example, that in the manifesto of the Green Party, there's a strong emphasis also to understand a European Republic and United Europe as part of a world community. That is not, the Republican ideals are not limited to Europe, but always have to be seen into a worldwide process of Republican integration, maybe a League of Republics, as Immanuel Kant defined it. And to see such the creation of a European Republic always as a first step towards some form of to solve and address global problems and to govern global externalities and problems. And therefore, for example, leads to another field, also migration, which rights do actually immigrants have on the Mediterranean Sea. The law approach also always keeps in mind that that even people who are not part of the European Union have rights and have human rights, and that such a vacuum of rights that existed on the Mediterranean Sea is maybe not tolerable. Yeah, but there's also maybe just some inputs for some further debates. It's also something that Ulrike Goro wrote a lot about. Yeah, but this was some, and there are many other fields, of course, and so, but there will be also points for the debate now that we can come now to. Yes, so first of all, thank you all very much for your interventions. And yeah, okay, we're a very small group now, so I don't know if we have to guide the debate so much, or if you already have some comments, ideas about what you just...
I would be interested to hear from Joachim how you see this debate we have just had here from an Irish point of view.
Yeah, that's I have to say now I feel uneasy here among all the political scientists, because I'm not a political scientist. But that is precisely what I was wondering about. There is obviously an understanding of republicanism, of the republic, among political scientists. Tito has already alluded to the fact that there are many different understandings of republicanism about, I'm thinking of the Republikaner, which have obviously a right-wing understanding, and republicanism in Ireland is a different animal altogether, because it is largely nationalist movement that has as its main aim the reunification of Ireland, as in the Irish Republican Army fighting for it with violent means. And that's this was a question that occurred to me when I was listening to you, and also to the question, to the points that Frau Liebert made, in terms of finding general acceptance within the EU of a republic, or fighting for a European republic. Is it possible that a different understanding of what republic means in different languages, in different countries, in different member states, can impede general acceptance? That was something that occurred to me. I'm also thinking most of the European member states call themselves republic, Poland as well. Does the republic in Polish mean something quite different from what we are talking about here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's my question.
I mean, historically, actually, all the Republikaner are perhaps an exception, but also the Irish Republic is rooted in these Renaissance notions of republic.
Mm-hmm.
And the Polish Respublika is the immediate derivation of the Latin. So in that sense, there's a common European heritage of a body of thought which has been, and a body of writing which has been used in the variety in the European countries, European regions, European towns, in different directions. But in the sense, there is a common ground of departure, if you will. That I do not see so much as the most difficult problem. The selling of that is much more difficult. That I immediately grant, yeah. But historically, there is a foundation on which you could build actually quite easily, as Zapatero in Spain, Tilo mentioned the example, actually tried to do. And he did that in a country where the Republican tradition is really quite small, where the notions of citizenship and civic governance was actually traditionally limited to a number of towns, and, Aragon, and to Valencia, and to Barcelona, and so on. So historically speaking, but
Martin, yeah, are you also talking about the Republicans during the Civil War, the Second Republic? Yeah, no. So this is really a strong tradition in Spain, huh? Yeah. So, and I think Zapatero built on that, and also maybe including anarchists, but I haven't looked too deep enough into what he said and wrote. But the anarchistic tradition is also very strong. So a more decentralized notion of democratic republicanism, I would say.
I think in Zapatero's case, it was actually that he heard Philip Pettit and thought this was a brilliant idea, and then invited Philip Pettit to join. And Philip, being originally trained as a Catholic theologian in Ireland, actually, immediately jumped on board and thought it was wonderful to do this. I remember that because we We used to talk about this quite a bit. I was extremely skeptic about what he was doing there. And part of the reason was because my own feeling was that Zapatero had very different, and the Spanish socialists had very different notions of what of a republic were in comparison with this historical foundation. Now, I have to admit that wasn't true. There were quite a few Spanish socialists, and certainly quite a few Catalans, who remembered Aragon and who remembered the Comuneros revolt of 1521, and had magnificent debates in Salamanca about the revolts of that period, where actually conservative Catholic theologians told me that we were all wrong. And that I was personally responsible for what the Dutch had done in the 1560s and 1570s. It reminded me a bit of the Irish debates, how passionate that can be still.
Let me say one thing, because I think Ulrike has brought up two very crucial notions. And one was, earlier you said about the notion of subsidiarity. And you also referred to anarchism or anarchist traditions and republicanism. I think the two go together, and we really have two models of republicanism. One is the Dutch model of the Dutch Republic, which is a federation of communities, essentially, cities and so on, but where the civic sense of responsibility for the res publica is a communitarian sense. And this has been an issue that has, how should I say, troubled republicanism from the beginning. Namely, what is this community, and can it only happen in very small communities? Rousseau is one who argued that way, and this is the whole tradition of the anarchist republican tradition. And we see it today in the model of subsidiarity, which is about the emptiest political notion that I know whatsoever of any political notion, because it means anything and nothing and has no substance. As much as possible up, but as little as necessary up, and as much as possible down. What does that mean? I think we need a criterion and for deciding that, and this is the reach of public goods. So as I can have a bicycle and a car in terms of my private goods, in a similar way, I am the owner of public goods in Paris, and I love it that our mayor has turned the major artery of Paris into a bicycling piste here. And that's my local public good. And in the same way, I have national public goods and I have European public goods. The reach is different. That means, of course, also that you can disintegrate this confusion that we have about feeling and national identities, and sometimes this is also lifted to the level of the demos, the German Constitutional Court. Thilo referred to it, but Calypso in Cambridge, in Oxford, also refers to democracy, meaning many people are somehow kratein, are somehow ruling. I think this leads us to the intergovernmental trap, where it says, I am Irish, I am German, and my ideas are like this. I always thought that when Jacques Delors in the 1990s said, few Germans believe in God, but all Germans believe in the Deutschmark, it was very funny, but total nonsense, because Helmut Schmidt never believed in the Bundesbank, but he was a German chancellor or ex-chancellor, which means that precisely this amalgamation of what is a local consensus to discuss what really has externality consequences on a much broader level is wrong. And so the question that Ulrike asked, which I think is absolutely crucial, how do we, so to say, enroll citizens into the European Republic, must pass by the fact that they are starting to understand that they are owners of different public goods. And that as owners of different public goods, they have also different citizen rights that they can and must exercise in order to govern these public goods. The implication of that, of course, is that we need a European-wide public debate about what are the public goods. Now, the part of the problem comes from the fact that initially or often people are saying Republicans are the counterpart to royalists. Of course, in Spain, you see nicely that didn't go together between a Republican government and a king, who knows how long. But in Ireland, this is particularly important. And Martin referred to Hobbes versus Harrington, which of course was, Hobbes is the Tory part of defending royalty, and Harrington is the Republican alternative that ultimately leads to the Whiggish movement and the liberals. What I want to say with that is that it has created then a common consensus at a time when public goods were by and large coherent and, how should I say, covering all the externalities for the people living in the country. But given that we now have externalities that go far beyond, to some degree even on the global scale, like with climate change and so on, it means that we really have to rethink these kind of identities in terms of an ownership or property sense of public goods. And I think if we can't manage that, we will not be able to move forward to European Republic in political terms.
Rika, yes.
Yeah, so this brings me to what I'm struggling with. The major problem, I hinted at it, the European, the global, the planetary public good of climate health. And and how to govern, how to manage this, how to reach climate neutrality in a way, in a Republican way, would mean that we get away from electoral short-termism, from logics which look only at the next elections. And this is what I see the major predicament in the European Union and worldwide also, because there are too many opportunities again and again, an unending series of opportunities to obstruct the European Green Deal, the Global Green Deal, and so on. And so this means, how do we construct a democratic republic, upscaling it, at least at the European level, that would free citizens from the short-termism of elections, building in new elements that weren't necessary maybe before, a second chamber, a third chamber, which would not be elected, but where science and also the interest of future generations is represented. Is this anywhere on the screen of the debate? Neo-republicanism?
Maybe that reminds me of Plato's Guardians, maybe, then we take more from the...
Yeah, think of the Bundesverfassungsgerichtsurteil, yeah, recently, which mandated the government, German government, to take into consideration future generations, the young generations who are not. So is this an issue at least, who entitles to be a citizen, to be taken into, to have a voice? Yes, yeah.
In the sense that when we look at republicanism, Republican debates as a resource for dealing with our own issues, it is as important to see what is positive as it is to see what is negative. And I think if you look at the more problematic lessons of republicans, of republicanism and republics, listening to you and to Stefan, Ulrike, I think there are I saw three key points at least. One is that, as you both emphasized, there is already a Republican polity and a European polity, and it is already providing public goods. So you're in a completely different situation. We are in a completely different situation than the Swiss, the Dutch, the Americans, and the French. They all brought about their republic by way of revolution. They started from scratch. In a sense, here the fundamental issue is how to convince citizens who are already affected by what you call the externalities of policy making. So it's in that sense, this is a very different kind of situation than traditional republics have been in. And the second point that struck me very strongly is that when we talk about widening the scale, enlarging the scale, Republicans have always gone for federal solutions. The problem, and they have worked. Look at Switzerland, look at the Dutch Republic existed for 3, and in a sense still goes on. They have worked to a certain degree. The problem of all republics that have a federal nature has been a certain stasis. Namely, they all tend to set up constitutional devices, constitutional arrangements that make change extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Switzerland is a spectacular example of that, but of course the United States is an even bigger example of that. Basically what it means is that if you look back at the history of the American Republic, the history of the Dutch Republic, what you see is that major change was only brought through, only occurred at moments of enormous crisis. The American Civil War, the New Deal of the 1930s and 40s in America, and some republics, most notably the Polish one, has simply not been able to deal with this. They succumbed in the 18th century. Being one of the most powerful of the 16th and 17th century, they simply didn't make it. Right? So there is an issue here when you talk about federations. And that has a lot to do, I think, with this idea that we tend to think in terms of levels. We have the cities, we have the states, and now we have Europe. And there's a bit of a pyramid thinking in that way, which we might have to cut across, so that actually at the lowest level, when you talk about the cities, there you should already start to talk about cooperations at European levels. Because the traditional federal system has this stasis problem. That's also partly because we want to, most republics wanted to protect the rights of their citizens by a Bill of Rights that is then written in stone and nobody dares to change it anymore. Look at the American gun debate, which is, from a historical point of view, absolutely ridiculous. To think that the guns of 1777 are the guns of 2021. As a historian, you just think, hello? But that is a crucial problem. And I think there I wouldn't go for a pyramid. I would like us to think about building in these European dimensions right from the bottom, exactly in order to enable this active citizenship. And the last thing I wanted to say is that indeed Republicans have enormous problems with world community. I mean, the traditional Republican answer to your question is, you conquer the world. How do you want to impose a climate policy? How do you want to convince the rest of the world of the climate policy? You conquer them. And unfortunately, this has been what the Roman Republic did. The Dutch Republic did it with its colonialism. The American Republic did it with its Pax Americana. There is a legacy there, which is, to put it mildly, slightly problematic. The answer, of course, the answer has been some kind of Kantian notion of a federation of republics. But actually, for a real republican, those republics are not republics. They actually suffer from exactly the same thing. So I think there is a phenomenal issue. And so it's either been through conquest, or it's been trying to say, we can have some kind of world community by some kind of federation again. And then the federation has the same problems, even more, I suppose, because it's at global level, than the federations of the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century had. So there, I think our current job as Republicans is to depart from the historical precedents and find mechanisms where you not only, where you especially avoid that problem of stasis. The European Union is already not the quickest moving political entity in the world. It's often accused of being extremely slow. Slowness is not so bad, of course, in politics, always. But I think there is a real issue where we need to come up with new ideas. And that, because a normal federation, if we go that level again with first chamber, second chamber, third chamber, what you end up with is chambers blocking each other. So on that realistic note.
Okay, or maybe just one very quick point, because I wanted to give maybe a short precision on the US case, which may be also interesting for European integration. So yeah, you said in the US also you had the revolution to create the democratic institutions and democratic constitution. But yeah, with the New Deal, actually the US were in a similar, the Roosevelt government, in a similar situation maybe as Europe today, because the original US constitution was still built on the agricultural economy of that time. And a reason for the Great Depression was also that there were missing actually macroeconomic stabilizing instruments on the national level. And this was difficult to achieve because of constitutional constraints. And so Roosevelt somehow had to change actually the constitution without changing the constitution in order to really create a stronger federal institutions. And so that's maybe the similar problem. How do I change that? So in the case of the European Union, you have both. You don't have macroeconomic stability, macroeconomic policies and instruments which are strong enough, or you didn't have, and you don't have also the political institutions. You don't have a real parliament, so the problem is bigger. But the answer to that Roosevelt and the Roosevelt administration found was then functionalism, not to say we create institutions framed, and this is a political science term, institutions that are designed for a very precise problem and to solve these problems. And then step by step, we create a change of the constitution without that people actually notice it. And yeah, this is what in political science then is called functionalism. And this was what Roosevelt did in the 1930s. This was then transferred in European integration. This is where neo-functionalism comes from. We cannot solve this problem of how to create now a sovereign, supranational, or over the member state institutions. And so we create functional institutions that solve very clear problems, public good problems, and then hope that somehow the institutional change will follow. Yeah, and this, of course, also many global international organizations are following a functional approach, actually, by exactly to avoid that problem somehow, to find global solutions without conquering the whole world. Yeah. Okay, yeah, Stefan, I mean, we are, time is running slowly out now, but Stefan, go ahead.
Yeah. I would like to emphasize that there are really two traditions in republicanism. One is, let's call it for simplicity, centralizing republicanism, with the French, the Italian Republic. And the other is the anarchic federalist tradition, the Swiss model, initially Althusius and the Dutch Republic and all that. Now, there's an intrinsic tension and problem with that in terms of norms, because the decentralizing element is emphasizing the, how should I say, the sameness in terms of thinking, behaving, etc. I just learned the other day that in Switzerland, if you are a foreigner and you want, in some communities, if you want to gain Swiss citizenship, I heard this about the case of someone who works for the municipality but is of Sri Lankan origin. There was a citizen meeting of more than 200 people to debate whether he deserves to become a Swiss guy. And sometimes these decisions depend simply on whether the person behaves well and says good morning and to his neighbors and so on. Now, that is the communitarian illiberty of republicanism. And I think it is very useful to reread Karl Popper and the Open Society and its Enemies, or Hierarchy and Homo Hierarchicus by Dumont, about the concepts of holism and individualism. What you see in modern market economy is that the individualist normativity has become dominant, and that is certainly true in America. Of course, the Hamilton-Madison transformation of republicanism was to say, is it possible in a big state rather than just a small one? And this ex pluribus unum is, of course, the creation of a unit out of the many, which is partly what we try to do in Europe too. But the issue is that we have the historic inheritance of all those republics who have become one out of the public debates that we have had for centuries. And so I have often said that in terms also centralizing and decentralizing federalist and non-federalist republics, to me, the models are really that need to find the symbiosis of a European republicanism is France and Germany. The French have to learn, and this is true for the Italians too, that la République peut être une et divisible, while in the Constitution of France it says la République est une et indivisible. And on the other hand, the Germans need to learn that the Bundesrepublik is first of all a republic and then a Bund, a federation. And I think it's this kind of symbiosis that we need to accomplish. And I think the only way how we can do it is by clearly separating the level of externalities in public goods.
So this is what I want to take away also. This is very important. Also, these two elements, I think it's an instrumental or functionalist argument for a European republicanism, yeah, governing public goods, different kinds. And the other one is the normative, which Martin has developed. So the citizens first self-governance and the notion of freedom as non-domination. So to bring this together also, the functionalist and the normative in a Republican umbrella or framework. And I would like to bring in also Philippe Petit at the end, because what I like is his idea how to avoid the tyranny of a centralized majority or centralizing majority rule. Yeah, so by creating these second tracks of courts for protecting the rights of minorities and civil society. So to have a balance between minorities, majorities, I think this is very important, especially in a diverse society. I would hope that we could continue this conversation, also talking about illiberal republicanism or neoliberal republicanism, which Antoine Vaucher has come up with. But Thilo, I found your overview of the many meanings of republicanism also very instructive. And nearly it has confused me, but I found it very useful. Thanks a lot to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
From the audience.
Yes, yeah.
Also your Irish comparative questions. Of course, we discussed it last time. I found it also it's very important, yeah, because this resonates, yeah, the implicit understandings of different contexts, yeah. And Joachim Joschka Fischer, you are not somehow.
No, I'm not related. No, not at all.
Sorry.
All right. I think we met in Brussels. I don't know whether you remember it, at the Jean Monnet meeting.
Ah, yeah.
Yes, yeah, we had a brief conversation afterwards. You know,
yeah.
2 years ago. Yeah,
Unfortunately, my co-author, Hans-Joachim Trenz, he disappeared. Hans-Jörg Trenz.
All right.
We did this book on the new politics of European civil society together. So
very interesting. Yes,
yeah.
I must look that up.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks to
okay. Thank you also very much. Yeah, perfect. That was a perfect summing up. And yeah, also for sure, somehow we can think about how to continue this conversation. Maybe somehow would be great. Great project. Maybe we can think a little bit about that, brainstorm, and to see how we can bring that further, to bring Republican thinking further, and develop Republican ideas. And that would be great for sure. So maybe we'll think about that and let you know.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, very much for being on that.
Thank you to you, Thilo, because you are really the driving force of this right now.
Okay, yes.
Thank you for organizing it.
Perfect. Okay.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.